She might be. Without a doubt, she might be. Because the great thing is that you can watch all of season 8, and I'm not giving anything away because I'm only saying this out of the top of my head. So don't quote me on this. But the great thing about that character is that you could be watching anyone, and it could be her with a different face on. So that could be the twist. She went through a very difficult period between season 4 and season 5 or 6, and she turned into a psychopath who just had this focus of revenge. But and what I liked about Game of Thrones is that she's set up to be your hero, your heroine, the person you're supposed to root for, and that you want her to exact the revenge that happened to her family. But the good thing about the TV show, at least in my opinion, is that it doesn't make it easy for you to like what she does. Because, and that's the way it should be, you know, revenge is not pleasant. So I like that they dealt with that. She's turned into a complete professional assassin now, so she's probably just as, you know, psychotic as she was in season 5. It's just that she has control now. That's an interesting question. No one has ever asked me that before. I think that's really interesting. Does he recognize himself in Arya? I don't think he recognizes himself, but he recognizes something in her. And I think he also does that job for Ned Stark because he's a good man. And I think there aren't many honourable people in Game of Thrones. That's why we all end up dead. Syrio Forel is another example. Anyone who kind of has their own principles and stands their ground doesn't really survive very long in Westeros. So that was, I think that is the key. But I remember the writers, David and Dan, the creators of Game of Thrones, the TV show, they said there has to be. He's not just her teacher. There is a surrogate father there as well, and her love for what she wants to do is recognised by Syrio Forel, and I think that is what bonds them, and also why he's willing to put himself in danger to save someone who he barely knows. But so that's why I think it's an interesting question, because that there has to be something that he recognises that makes him sacrifice himself for her, for a child. So yeah, I think it's more to do with the fact that he knows what's at stake. It's a strange thing because they're so different. They're so different because when you do theatre, it feels more intimate. Even if you do a big production, it still feels very intimate. You know that ultimately, when you end up performing every night, you are completely in control. It doesn't, whatever the director has worked with you on, and all the crew and everyone, when it comes to finally performing it, they have to leave it to us to do. And the fact that you have to do it every night, you have to learn, because it's impossible. You know, it's not natural for a human being to repeat something over and over again, say the same lines at the same time in the evening and in the afternoon every day. This is unnatural, right? This is why we have movies, so you can just put them on and screen them over and over again. The quality never changes. It's always the same. But that is the hard thing. That is in a way, that's where the professionalism comes in. How do you do that every day and find the same reactions and the same feelings so that it's authentic? That's what we're always trying to do. And so the authenticity has to happen even when you're doing something like fantasy, like Game of Thrones, or even science fiction like Star Wars. It all still has to, you have to believe it, you know, even if we don't have, you know, ships that travel at light speed. We have to believe that that happens. And that has less to do with you than everything else that happens around you. So when you work on a production like The Force Awakens, and you're doing a scene like, you know, the Maz Kanata's kind of castle, where you've got hundreds of people and you don't know whether they're animatronics or whether there's someone in a costume or whether it's being you know, you don't know these things because you're just looking at them in awe and wonder. It's a very different experience. You realize that you're a small cog in a big machine. But I think the great thing about making movies is that you have to trust the people that you're working with.
What do you prefer, the big machine or
I like the intimacy for myself, but the process of working on a big film or a great TV show is the exciting bit. To be honest, I never really watch the movie. I mean, of course I had to watch Force Awakens because I'm a Star Wars fan, and Game of Thrones I really loved, but most of the stuff that I do, the kind of TV in Britain, and I don't really ever watch it. People always kind of message me going, "Oh, I saw you on TV today," and I was like, "Oh, really? Was it any good?" Because I would never watch it, because for me the process is the most important thing. So I was very lucky to know Nina Gold, who is the casting director of Game of Thrones and also Star Wars, and you name it. She casts everything nowadays. So I was very lucky. When I was a very young actor, when I first graduated, she would come and see me in very small productions, not in theatres, but in, you know, bars and upstairs in rooms, you know, that weren't really theatre. And so I've known her a long time. So when it came to doing Game of Thrones, and they were looking for people, and of course you can imagine, they looked at nearly all the British actors, you know. It was one of those jobs where they looked at hundreds and hundreds of people. They called me up because she knew me, and she said, you know, I think, you know, you should read for one of these parts. And the part she gave me was Lord Varys.
Okay. And
I read it, and it was a scene with Ned Stark when he's in prison before, you know, he gets executed. And it was a fantastic scene, and I read it, and they liked it, and the producers from HBO liked it, but they thought I wasn't quite right for the part. But then they went, oh, but we think this is get him to read this part, and that's when they gave me Syrio Forel to read. And the interesting thing is that the audition was to learn the whole of the first scene with Arya, the first lesson, which is like 3 minutes long. And most people don't learn that for an audition. 3 minutes is a long, it's like pages and pages, and you're the only one who's talking, really. So it was quite hard to learn. But they also wanted to see that I could sword fight, because in the breakdown that they send actors when they're asking for a particular type of person, it said they need to be proficient at sword fighting. Now, along with horse riding and singing and being able to do accents, these are many things that you see on actors' CVs, you know, on their resumes. You always see the horse riding. But to be honest, I don't know many people who actually can horse ride. They always put it because they always know they're going to need someone who can do it. And you know that you're going to get trained to do it anyway. But I had sword fighting on there, but it was because I did have a lot of experience. I'd worked at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and that is where I learnt many of the things. But of course, I was lucky enough to audition again and again and again. When you audition, you don't really know that. You try to not think about getting the job, because the odds are very unlikely that you'll get it. You just do the best you can and then forget about it. But they asked me to come back, and maybe 5, 6 times. And each time you ask to come back, you get more nervous. Because, of course, you know you're getting closer to maybe getting the part. So that's very difficult. But luckily that was how it started, because I knew the casting director. I did 2 weeks, intensive 2 weeks with, I knew I needed to have someone to help me. And HBO chose a man called William Hobbs. And William Hobbs is, when it comes to period sword fighting, he is the man since the 70s who has choreographed all period sword fighting. One of the first things he did was The Duelists with Harvey Keitel and David Carradine. I think that was Ridley Scott's very first movie. And he was the guy who choreographed all those fights. And those fights are fantastic fights. And he was the person who taught me. And, you know, he was in his 70s. I think he's still going strong. But he was the man who, together, we learnt what the vocabulary of the style of the water dance was. Because it had to be slightly different. It couldn't be a particular style that we know. It had to be created from scratch. And he was the man who helped me. And then after that, I went to Northern Ireland and met Maisie. And then I taught her, in the space of 2 days, everything I'd learned. Because he didn't come to Northern Ireland. I worked with him in London. And Maisie was already starting to do some work on the first season. And then I met her and I taught her what I'd learned. But both me and Maisie come from dance backgrounds. So when I was younger, I did a lot of dance. And so learning choreography, and Maisie as well, she did a lot of street dance at school. Learning choreography was something that we took on board, and because we knew that, you know, our scenes were very limited, we made a deal that we were not going to let our stunt doubles do any of the fights, that we were going to do it all ourselves. So all of it is us, and we are very proud of that.
Yes.
Yeah.